All right, so this is one of my interviews I've been looking the most forward to. This book, Bon. Just think about this. They really did, I believe, steal his notebooks, and this book talks a lot about it, that he wrote the lyrics to Back in Black as he died. I really believe those notebooks were stolen. And we're not talking about an album that sold 500,000 copies. We're not talking about an album that sold 1 million copies. We're talking about an album that is in the Thriller stratosphere, okay? Back in Black. And this tells the story of Bon, his final years. It's a masterpiece, this book. And I'm going to go to my interview with author Jesse Fink. He's got a new version of it, an updated version coming out shortly. And here's our interview with Jesse Fink. All right, we got Jesse Fink, the author of Bon, The Last Highway. I've had this book forever. There's a new version, updated version coming out. And I was telling you earlier, this is definitely in my top 5 rock books of all time. This is a masterpiece, man. This thing is just so well done and so great.
I'll use that on my website. Thank you.
Thank you. How did you? I mean, I know you did the other Young's book, but it's just we've had so many great books about Bruce Lee, Jim Morrison, but when I was reading this, it just really made me realize how big this AC/DC monster is. This how big, what a big business, what a big band, what it is. Yeah, I mean, it really. I've loved them my whole life, but I didn't realize this. I don't know if monolith is the correct word.
I mean, the Youngs was a completely different book to Bon, The Last Highway. I mean, it started out really kind of as a personal tribute, I guess, to AC/DC for kind of saving my life. I was very depressed and kind of suicidal one night, and I put on Powerade, and I just kind of got lifted out of this terrible depression that I was in at the time. And I just thought, well, you know, the music is incredibly powerful and restorative, and you know, I want to write a book about it. Surely that's the secret to sort of AC/DC's sort of appeal and success around the world, is that they've connected to all these people, these millions of people, you know, on a very personal, primal level. So that was what that book was about. And then it was quite successful. And, you know, my publisher here in Australia, Penguin, you know, was interested in doing a follow-up. And of course, I suggested, you know, BonScott, because at the time there had only ever been one book written about Bon, which was Clinton Walker's book back in the early 90s. And I thought that there was much more to the Bond story than was in that book, and obviously sort of set out to write a narrative that was focused on the band's American journeys between 77 and 79. That was my starting point. And initially I wanted it to end at the end of 79, you know, when they finished, you know, their last American show. But then I realized I couldn't avoid the whole issue of his death. And that ended up sort of taking 1.5 2 years just working on that part of the book alone.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that, so to me, I don't know, you grew up in Australia, correct?
Yeah.
That Bon represented something that, to me, I'm 52, an older guy that he's the ultimate template for this guy that just didn't wear a shirt, that had the jean vest, that was rock and roll. Even if it wasn't a BonScott in your neighborhood, you had a guy like that. And he was the ultimate template of this man's man rock and roll guy that didn't try too hard, that just was the essence of everything. And what I loved was I didn't realize he was so steeped in the South and Skinnered in that country. AC/DC really did some time in Florida and Texas, and I could feel that from him. How do you think that impacted him all the time they did there in the 70s? I had no idea about this Southern journey they took at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, which is really interesting for me, because I was just sort of picking up clues here and there. And, you know, I didn't really know anything about what I was doing, really, other than I was starting with the first gig in Texas and kind of plotting AC/DC's journey over those 3 years, you know, concert by concert, state by state, and basically seeing where I ended up. And after about 6 months, actually, I found it, I felt like I was at a bit of sort of a dead end, really. I didn't think that there was much more to the story that hadn't already been told. And of course, I didn't want to write a book that was just rehashing stuff that other people had written. I can't think of anything worse than in rock biographies.
You absolutely did not. That's what's so just, I mean, I can't preach this. And this is like when you walk out of the theater after seeing Pulp Fiction and you wanted to know this movie is different. You know what I mean? This is a masterpiece.
And you know, literally, I had a map of America. I was plotting kind of, you know, where AC/DC played concerts, and I was going through old copies of Billboard from the 70s because they were online. You know, they'd been digitized. They were online. I could read these billboards that would show you where, you know, the FM stations were in each city, you know, what songs that they were playing, who the DJs were, and so on. And I thought, well, it stands to reason that if AC/DC was, you know, touring, they were, you know, visiting these cities, they were doing gigs, they would drop into the studios of these local FM stations and do interviews, right? So out of the 100 DJs that I ended up contacting on Facebook who were still alive, you know, 5 or 6 sort of had interesting stories to tell me about BonScott or meeting AC/DC or whatever. And one of them was a guy called Neil Mursky, who was a DJ down in Orlando in '79. And he said, yeah, man, you know, look, I've actually got a audio recording of Bon that I've never, you know, shown anyone, never played to anyone. You can have it. And it was like, well, fuck me, you know, this is archaeology, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's what you kind of dream of. It's like an unheard recording. And then he said, look, you know, I don't know if you know, but, you know, he was hanging out down here in Miami. He had a girlfriend down here. He was hanging out with a band called Critical Mass when they were doing rehearsals for Highway to Hell, and he put me in touch with these people, right? So at the time, I was actually in New York, and I went down to Miami, and I spent a weekend with Bon Scott's girlfriend, you know, from 1979, and I you know, over the course of that weekend or 3 days that we spent together, you know, I got taken around to various places where, you know, AC/DC had rehearsed, where Bon had written songs, where Bon had hung out at a local bar and got up on stage with Critical Mass and played some songs. You know, got to meet, you know, people that he'd been hanging out with, got a real feel for how sort of Highway to Hell had come together. But the more time that I spent with this woman, the more that I realized I felt like some of the songs on Back in Black were about her, right? So if you actually go back through, you know, Bon's songwriting over, you know, the albums that he did with AC/DC, he was always writing about his life. You know, people that he'd met. I mean, just recently, you know, I wrote a story about, you know, the origins of Whole Lotta Rosie and figured out who she was, and you know, so he was writing songs from his own life.
And you even talk here about the vernacular of love letters and the same vernacular that falls into the songs. The woman's horse was named Double Time. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I realized, you know, that American Thighs, which is, you know, obviously off You Shook Me All Night Long, was this woman. It just made sense to me, and you know, maybe it's me kind of, you know, getting sucked into, you know, my own confirmation bias, but I mean, just I was talking to other people who were telling me these stories about how close these people were to each other, you know, Bon and this girl. And it all just made sense. And so suddenly then I'm looking at the songs on Back in Black and I'm thinking, oh, now I can actually kind of understand the lyrics to this song. That Back in Black sort of just opened up to me completely. And then I started going over kind of, you know, other things that sort of AC/DC had said about, you know, sort of the genesis of the songwriting on Back in Black. And I just didn't think it sort of bore any scrutiny at all. it just didn't stand up.
No, I mean, you paint a picture. We've all thought it. As kids, we grew up with our urban legends, our AC/DC urban legends, but you really connect the dots. Nobody's connected the dots like this, from love letters to everything. We go, this is definitely true. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and of course I spoke to Silver Smith, who was the muse for Bond for Power Age, and so all those great songs on that album are about Silver and his relationship with her. And I got to speak to her before she died at the end of 2016. So I got all these valuable, very valuable sort of insights from her and other women that Bond were involved with, and managed to piece together this sort of jigsaw puzzle about, Bond's last days. And then, of course, it sort of went into, his final 24 hours, which is just, a clusterfuck of, of mystery.
It's still changing. This the new updated version. I started reading. It's still changing.
Yeah. And so the first edition came out in 2017. And I was sort of public enemy number one, really, to a lot of AC/DC fans, I guess.
Remember when it came out? It was...
Yeah.
I got it the day it came out, just one of those books you tear through, you don't put down.
Yeah, but I got death threats. I had friends go to the FBI, all sorts of stuff, because I was getting like serious death threats from people about, the things that had been written in this book. And, it was ridiculous, really. I mean, I just felt like I was kind of doing the journalistic job that should have been done 40 years ago. Like,
and you love the band. That's the thing. Like you say, you love the band. You're not like not a fan of the band,
No. I love the band, but at the end of the day, I want the truth told about this fantastic individual who you introduced at the beginning, and to this day, yes, he's a rock god. Yes, he's held up as sort of a paragon of masculinity, the kind of guy who can, drink all day, shag all day, get up on stage, blow everyone away, get 3 hours sleep, get up early and do it all again. That's the sort of the mythology of BonScott, which everyone sort of feels very connected to. But the reality, of course, was that he was a far more complex person who was pretty much playing a role on stage. He was a very different person off stage. He was into different things. He was into different music. He was a far more kind of intellectual person than he might present, through, AC/DC's videos and songs. And I wanted to sort of present that more sort of complex, rounded person. Because ultimately, I feel, I'm more appreciative of him being this more well-rounded human being. I don't like him sort of being this caricature.
No, I got that from your book. Like someone once said that Iggy Pop is smarter than he acts and David Bowie is dumber than he had. I look for whatever that is. And I saw that in this Bond, like he seems like someone you want to be friends with, and it made sense. And it also made me sad that he seems separate from his pack. You always felt that, but you kind of affirm, just like David Lee Roth with Van Halen, and David Lee Roth is no dummy. I know like they were both separate from their packs, and Bond seemed to genuinely love people and love the people around him. And the AC/DC machine was the AC/DC machine. There's something dark and mysterious, and we love it, but there's something very mysterious. I always say Axl Rose never showed up on time, missed concerts. He goes and plays with AC/DC. He's been showing up early ever since. I don't know what happens in that machine. You know what I mean?
And the Youngs, like I said, started out as a sort of a tribute book for me, and then it very quickly sort of became a different sort of beast. And I got sucked into the whole sort of business story of AC/DC and AC/DC's rise in America and the record company's support and the people behind the scenes who kind of made AC/DC what they are today. And a lot of those people basically got fucked over, essentially. And the story of Back in Black, I guess, is that the power of that album, the black cover, the way that it was promoted, sort of in the wake of Bond's death, it really benefited from Bond's passing. You know, that was the power that kind of suffused that album, apart from being, you know, a fucking amazing album.
And we're not talking about a record that sold a few copies. We're not talking about a record that went gold. We're talking, you know, I mean,
80 million copies.
Yeah, right? This isn't a small. This is.
And to this day, it's a masterpiece, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I'm not taking anything away from it. But I do think that, you know, Bond had a lot more to do with it than has ever been acknowledged and certainly has ever been credited. And, you know, that was obviously, you know, part of the focus of the book as well. You know, and that's a whole other mystery, you know.
I mean, and definitely the part that we've always heard about the urban, there are some missing notebooks that came after he died, definitely left his apartment quickly.
Yeah, well, the fact that, you know, if anyone said, you know, Bond didn't leave any notebooks behind, well, they're just bullshitting it.
Because right.
Yeah. He had a notebook or an exercise pad where he would jot down his ideas, work on his lyrics. And Silversmith told me before she died that, you know, the night that Bond went out with Alistair Kinnear, that he had invited her to, you know, go out and celebrate because he had finished the lyrics for Back in Black.
Yeah. Amazing.
So what happened to them?
Yeah, it's just incredible.
You know? And then you have, you know, we had an interview. Vince Lovegrove, who was in a band called the Valentines with Bond before AC/DC, did an interview with one of, you know, Bond's brothers, where one of Bond's brothers said that the band actually got, you know, royalties for Back in Black. Now, I don't understand why, you know, a band that is as tight with its money that as AC/DC would be giving royalties to BonScott for Back in Black.
Yeah, and it's just insane. And wow, and who does ultimately right now? I'm trying to think back to the book. Who gets his money? Who's right now in his family is the one that's living okay off whatever they get from the BonScott royalties?
The brothers and the children of the brothers.
Okay.
Yeah, that is essentially the BonScott estate, and you know, they have been very active, I guess, in kind of, you know, circling around, you know, the commercial rights for Bond really since the book came out. You know, a lot of trademarks and all that sort of stuff has been registered, and so, you know, you can buy official BonScott merchandise now.
Okay. I mean, the coolest thing is, like, you just make him feel like, you could tell like he was just a cool, like the hard dude, almost like the biker that's hard but nice to you. He just seemed like, and I think everybody he was with, you could see he had this big connection. Like even the women that they feel like everyone thinks he's ready to settle down with them. It doesn't seem like lies. It just seems like me and you didn't get to meet him. So some magical connection of the people he was around. It just seems beautiful what he did to people and fans.
Yeah, I never met anyone who really had a bad word to say about him. The only stories really I heard were, you know, like there was one concert where I think it was in Rhode Island, where he was just so drunk that basically he fell off the stage and just couldn't finish the show. So his shows were suffering towards, you know, the end of his life. And you can actually just sort of look at Bond from photographs, and you just look at him from, you know, mid 1978, where he's this supremely fit, cut guy who just looks absolutely sensational, to, you know, the end of 79, early 1980, where he just looks haggard, you know, wasted. He's obviously on something. He just wasn't in a good way. And so really, you know, I guess the title, The Last Highway, is about, you know, Bond taking the road to his own death, and it was his choice.
Yeah. Just I mean, he obviously living. I mean, well, he definitely was living it, what he was writing about. I mean, it's all there. It's just, the stories are just there. And it definitely seems like Back in Black becomes the pinnacle of his story. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind when you start really read your book and you read the lyrics. It's just, like you say, it's vernacular. You go, oh, that guy, if that guy writes like that guy. You know what I mean?
And there's just been so many inconsistent kind of utterances about the origins of songs on that album over the years. There hasn't just been a consistent story that I would, be very suspicious about the sort of the anointed narrative about that album. I can't necessarily prove anything, but I certainly present a sort of a case where I just want the reader to kind of look at what I've come up with and go, you know what, you make up your own mind.
Yeah. And now what was it like? You're interviewing a lot of people, and I'm not saying I didn't want to use a bad word, shady. We've all met those people where they spin stories, and you have to do the math. And you've done other books on, subjects that include a lot of shady people. So what do you do when you're interviewing all these shady people? Do you have to do the math? It's like, those are the people that have the best stories, and you really have to break down what you're going to take in. How do you do that?
You basically have to verify anything as much as possible. And that takes up an inordinate amount of time when you're writing a book. I mean, I was just talking to someone the other day about, this last book that I wrote, which is about a cocaine trafficker in Miami. He's telling me all these wild, crazy stories, which are fantastic on the surface. But I have to go out and I have to verify them. I have to kind of, find the names that he's mentioning, find the dates, kind of, cross everything off and make sure that it's, based in some sort of reality. And that takes an enormous amount of time. So, I mean, you like on one footnote, you can spend an entire day. And with BonScott, I think Bon actually had probably 100 pages of notes and bibliography in it. I mean, there was a shitload of bloody research in it. That was because I really took it upon myself to make sure that everything was checked, and that everything that people were reading was at least verified by one source. And if it couldn't be, I would certainly kind of draw attention to it and say, look, I can't verify this, Or,
right, and you say that in the book. But did you just know? I mean, there had to be. I mean, a lot of these people I know, they talk forever. I call them energy vampires. They'll just go and go, and you're their audience. They've been waiting for so long to spit so much out. And you just.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing was that, people sort of said to me, oh, Pete Way will just sort of, crap on and won't stop. And, these UFO guys, don't even bother. They've lost their memories. They have no kind of recall. They're not good on details or anything like that. But that was not my experience. I actually found both of them, in fact, all three of them, Paul Raymond as well, were really helpful. They had great recall. They kind of, Paul Chapman in particular was really, really kind of very clear about what happened with him and Bon. And I spoke to Silver, like I said, I spoke to Joe Fury, who was, Bon's mate and Silver's ex, who was also sort of in that scene. Obviously there were, other people that I couldn't talk to because they were dead, but, I found Zena Kakuli, who admitted to being with Alistair and Bon the night Bon died, which had never come out. So it wasn't much of a police investigation that went on at the time.
And when you talk about those UFO guys, I got to spend half a day with Pete Way, and this is what your book strikes me as, and Bond strikes me as. They call these men beasts, and you need to be able to man the beast. Obviously, you can handle a beast. You know what I mean? Pete Way was a beast. I mean, that just like Morrison, like on a large man. And if you can handle that, but if you can't handle it and you're just very tight, you're just going to think the guy's out of his mind. It's just going to be like a nonviolent Charles Manson or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would have spoken to, I don't know, 50 rock stars, from that era. That were either, in bands like, there was, Mike Anthony from Van Halen and two guys who were just sort of in support bands on the road with AC/DC. But, some of them, I remember, one of the guys from, what was it? I think it was Def Leppard or something, was it Def Leppard? No, Judas Priest, I think, had very little to kind of contribute, or he was keeping it for himself for his own book. And, but then you would get other guys who were so happy to talk and had, huge amounts of material that they just wanted to impart because they loved Bond so much, And so when you're putting the book together, yes, you might have, one line from, this guitarist in Judas Priest, but then you might have, paragraphs and paragraphs from, someone like Pete Way or Paul Chapman or someone who's very happy to help you. But at the end of the day, they all contribute something. They're all contributing kind of missing pieces to this story that you're putting together, and they're all valuable. So whether it was, just one line or, paragraphs from, one guy, it all helped.
Yeah. That part with, what was the local band's name? That really moved me, man, just because it seemed like he needed friends. What was the local band was it in Florida? What was that band's name again?
Oh, Critical Mass.
That's it. I mean, that's a local band's name. I even love the band's name, and he's
who they performed on stage at a venue called Tight Squeeze, and in fact, there was also another Miami band called Tight Squeeze, named after the venue, who also played with Bon. And Critical Mass got up on stage and played, I think it was 3 songs, and from memory, 2 of them were like "Give Me a Bullet" and "Up to My Neck in You," and it's like, what an experience for these guys, to have BonScott on stage, doing "Give Me a Bullet," which I think is probably the only recorded instance of Bon actually doing that song live. And these guys did it on Hollywood Beach in Miami, and I went there, and it was like this tiny little hole in the wall, and these guys got very close to him. They all told me stories about sort of hanging out with him and going to parties. And the interesting thing was that, I met people independently, and they all sort of corroborated the same stories. So, I didn't rely on one person just to tell, one part of that story. I went to sort of multiple sources and got it checked. And so it all kind of, was verified.
It is amazing when you get these stories that are so crazy. And I used to work with this guy, Kim Fowley, that formed the Runaways. And I'd go around and I realized none of his stories were lies, but they just seemed so far-fetched. But you're like around a guy from Atlantic. Yeah, Kim turned me on to Jimi Hendrix.
I think I spoke to Kim for the Youngs, actually, before he died.
Oh, really? Kim?
Yeah.
I spent a year, and Kim was one of those people where, like, I know, like it's not one of it's a lot, but it's so, there's no way it really did all happen. I've heard it from Robbins. Oh, Kim did that. Robbins and you're like, it really, like, there wasn't one lie, but it all seems like lies because it was just so far out there.
Yeah, I think he produced a band. I can't remember the name. It was like this female band that did a cover of an Easy Beat song, because the Youngs was sort of, about how, the Easy Beats kind of influenced AC/DC, and the sound of AC/DC really comes from the Easy Beats, and certainly for like American readers, a lot of them were very unfamiliar with the Easy Beats, apart from Friday on My Mind. But, there was definitely, a link between those two bands, and fact, Kim Fowley was, like a minor player in that. Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the Kim true stories. Said something about AC/DC. My old band in the late 80s, early 90s was in New York, and Derek Oliver, who had something to do, I think, with AC/DC, or was Atlantic, said, oh, Kim did this, blah, 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 AC/DC. Like, even that checks. So we're talking about these people that do check out, but it's just, you got to get them talking.
But there were so many people, particularly, when I wrote The Youngs, and I was, looking at how sort of AC/DC got through that sort of 1976 to 78 period, where essentially, Atlantic wanted to dump them. And there were a lot of, really important people behind the scenes who did a lot of legwork for those guys, who never really got the kind of the kudos that they deserved. And I wanted to kind of, acknowledge them. I've always been kind of drawn to, telling the stories of underdogs, and there were a lot of them in the AC/DC story. And I think actually, when I think about it, Bon is another one of them. He ended his life with, $30,000 in the bank, and, I don't think he ever really got the sort of the recognition that he deserves.
It reminds me a lot of the Morrison story. I mean, Morrison had like 2 demands from the Doors. He split all that money, and they just they couldn't, they put the Skylark commercial out. He asked, don't do that. And even his money just said, can you just give it to Pamela and they just couldn't do it. Just 2 requests for such a good dude.
Yeah. But I guess the thing with Bon was that at the end of his life, he was only 33 years old, but he looked 50. He really lived hard, and I think he wanted to leave the band. He had enough, and this was the story that I was told when I wrote the book. And of course, this was a big sort of shit fight when the book came out, and I sort of said this. How dare you say that Bon wanted to leave AC/DC? But not so long ago, one of the band members in Fraternity, which was his band before AC/DC, actually came out and said, Bon had actually told me that he wanted to leave AC/DC at the end of '79. So again, it was corroborated. And this time with this edition, it turned up an interview from French media in 1979 where Bon actually says he wants to leave. He wants to go fishing. He'd had enough.
Well, you don't just land it there. That's what I love about this book. You talk about the belt buckle, the Skinnerd, and I don't even know if I'm taking it in right, but just the South influence. And you go, there's a total Ronnie Van Dant, another just badass, bare-chested, good dude, hard, good dude. You go, yeah, I could see him going down that Southern rock route.
Yeah, and particularly if he was in love with a girl from Florida. He probably wanted to, he was thinking of maybe, settling there. And, and certainly there are stories about him going out to California and, who knows? I think, Bon had sort of girlfriends in every port, as Pete Way would say. And, he had various women in his life who were important to him and he was important to them. And at the end of the day, I can't give you the definitive kind of, final months of Bon's life. You go to different people, they'll tell you a different story. So the one that I've got in my book is just the one I want to tell, and it's the only one I could tell, because not everyone wanted to talk to me either.
Yeah. Going back to that, the South, what do you think the South's influence was on him and his music? I just feel like you had to be in his psyche by the time you've done all this research.
Well, there's if you listen to Power Age, there's that whole kind of Americana kind of feel all the way through it, really, isn't there? And and certainly the way that he was dressing, he basically didn't take off that Skinnerd, belt buckle for most of '79. It had obviously sort of had an effect on him. He was hanging out with guys from Outlaws, another great Southern rock band, and a lot of bands that were playing with AC/DC on the road were Southern rock bands. And just speaking personally, it's one of my sort of favorite genres of music. So I think Bon had good taste.
Totally. Now, and 2 more questions. Are you scared writing something like this? Are you worried that the AC/DC monster is going to sue, or I mean, is it scary doing something like this? No,
not really. I was very, very careful. And the thing is, like I said before, I present it in such a way where I'm saying, look, I can't tell you 100% that this is the truth, but from my own investigation, it certainly appears that this is the most plausible kind of scenario in this situation. And if you're remotely interested in how Bon died, or you're remotely interested in whether his songs ended up on Back in Black, take a look at this story. Take a look at what I've kind of put together, through my own investigation, and take in these facts, and then look at it and tell me whether you think that it's plausible. And the thing is, the great thing is, the heartening thing is that, so many people come to me now and say, oh, you know what, I was a complete skeptic before, but after reading that book, I'm absolutely convinced that, 1, Bon died of a heroin overdose, and 2, that he had something to do with Back in Black. And if you had gone to anyone 5 years ago, they would have said no on both those scores.
Yeah, the book is it's amazing. There's just the way it comes together and all the stories intersect. It doesn't seem like TMZ or anything. It seems like a love letter, and you feel like you know him. You feel like, yeah, like, was he cold? A lot of stuff going on. But it asks me to remember a day I was partying like this many years ago. You wouldn't remember every detail, but the picture starts to get painted. What I like is you start to feel it. The book makes you really feel what was going on from the South to when he, died that night,
And
just the cold. It feels cold. You go, just to know that it was cold when he died, how cold it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But also to debunk the whole thing of, Ozzy Osbourne saying that he died of hypothermia. He didn't die of hypothermia. And that sort of has got a lot of traction over the years. And, but, I as I said at the beginning, I wanted to sort of trace his American journeys. And as I was doing it, I really got into it as well, because I was discovering bands that, had played with AC/DC on the road as support acts or whatever that I'd never heard of. And then I would go to YouTube or Spotify or whatever and find these bands and listen to their music and just completely discover music that I'd never heard of, and then, get in touch with these people through Facebook or whatever, who were very happy to talk to me because they hadn't talked to anyone in 20 years about their music, and there were so many talented people in that era. And, I sort of became really good friends with, David Krebs, who was one of the principals of Lieber Krebs, that managed AC/DC. And he really liked the book. And we even talked about, possibly, turning it into a film. And I said to David, if we did it, I would want it to be as much as sort of a tribute to that era of American music where you had just such a rich vein of bands, on the road, doing these big shows, big sort of arenas and festivals and, these big events like in San Francisco and Cleveland and, where really behove a band to be as tight as possible as a live act, that you had to have talent to be successful. You couldn't pretend to be good. You had to be good. And that was what was so special about that era, because, these bands were out there sort of every night of the week, getting better and better and better. And that's why AC/DC is so fucking good, because they've just played so many times. They're the tightest band on the planet.
Totally. It's funny you talk, I'm from the Bay Area, and just those pictures of Bon, and I don't know whether it's a Coke, but it feels in my head like he just has a Coke in his hand, shirtless backstage. You get just the look. There's just some look over him when he just stands with the can of Coke or the whatever he has in his hand. He always had something in his hand in those pictures, I know. Just so magical, man.
Yeah, a great personality. And, it's a shame that, Silver told me that she had, 800 letters or something from Bon and they all disappeared, which would have been incredible to sort of get, my hands on those. But
the book's perfect. So even your book paints a picture where I understand where, though he was this big rock star, he would sleep in a car by himself. Angus Young ain't getting in the car by himself. He ain't, he wants to know that he's got his own hotel room or whatever. But you go, Bon Wood he was a part rat. You know what I mean? Those rock stars like Slash could still just be a rat at times. You could just see that he can just go back to his early roots and be that teenage kid.
Yeah, he wasn't a pretentious person in any way.
No, that's just another one of the things you paint in this book. To close out, I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the latest album, Power Up?
Wasn't a fan. I thought it just sort of came across as sort of discarded B-sides, nothing terribly catchy. But look, for some people, it's manna from heaven. They love everything that the band does, and that's fine. If it makes them happy, great. But personally, I just haven't really felt any kind of great affinity to any AC/DC record really since probably Flick of the Switch, which is 1983. So that's going back a long way now.
Yeah,
long way. And I'm not. It's not to say that AC/DC hasn't had some pretty good songs.
I get that
since then. But as whole albums, you know, that are enjoyed in their totality.
Yeah.
I haven't really enjoyed a full AC/DC album probably since, you know, Back in Black.
Okay, I get it. I get it. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. We got the updated version of Bond, The Last Highway, coming out. Everybody, I can't say enough about this book. I love this book, and I love that you're here. And say goodbye to everybody and hang out so I can say goodbye to you.
Thanks so much for, you know, listening in, guys, and thank you, mate, for a great interview.